Alright class, now we're getting to the real stuff. We have a lot of videos this week, but normally each week there really only be one or maybe two videos that focus on the lecture portion of class. So before you actually watch this video, do me a favor. Open up that PDF that has this PowerPoint inside of it and just take a couple minutes and just read it. It's very short. Read the highlights and just kind of digest it a little bit and then come back to the video at this point, okay? Alright. Right off the top, week one, The Avengers. This is the 2012 movie. You've got to be asking yourself, what the hell is this teacher doing showing The Avengers in an intro to cinema class? Think about it. I mean, what? You're supposed to be watching boring black and white films. Why would I assign this? Let me get to that in a second. The broader points of this sort of presentation are these two things here. So what is rhetoric? How does rhetoric work? What are the current economics of American film right now? Okay, so let me start off just with The Avengers. The Avengers portion speaks to the second point. That's why we're watching the film. It's very much representative. It's a great example of how the economics work right now. So let's push that off on the side and let's talk rhetoric for a second. Now, everybody that watches television news is familiar with this piece of vocabulary, rhetoric, because within politics and cable news, it's a term that's used constantly. And in that world, the way we understand what rhetoric is rhetoric is always used as a pejorative term for how the other person talked. But that's not the authentic definition of what rhetoric is. Rhetoric is a very straightforward idea. This goes back 2,000 years to the Greeks and Socrates and Plato and all of those frat boys. So rhetoric is the art of effective or persuasive speaking in writing, or in many other forms. This is a dictionary definition. It's one way this is how we persuade people very often. Now, why start with this? Because two reasons. Rhetoric is very important in your life. It's an incredible skill you want to be aware of and develop. So let's start with that right there. Well, what do I mean? Well, okay. Rhetoric has three pieces to it. Now, in the old days, in the Greek days, we would call these three pieces ethos, pathos, and logos. In contemporary American English, we would translate those to credibility, emotion, and logic. Now, a couple quick points here. You see the stars? The stars mean that these are pieces of information that I'm going to quiz you on. These are going to appear on tests. So whenever you see that star, that is a prompt for you to actually absorb the information. Okay, credibility, emotion, and logic. What it means is that if you want to make an argument to somebody, you want to be really, really effective, you need all three pieces. Now, the amazing thing about this is that children, without ever being taught, start to do this instinctively. They start to learn how to build arguments and persuade people. Now, think about your own life for a second. Say you're at school, and you have some issue that's sort of in a gray zone. You have to go into an office and you have to persuade someone to help you, to assist you. How do you do it? Beforehand, what do you think about? What are your arguments? What are your preparations? And generally speaking, we always defer to this group. Okay, now here's how this might actually play out. You might start with logic. In a bureaucracy, it's very common. Somebody might go in and say, hey, I need your help because, and you might present a very logical argument for what's going on. They might refer to a piece of text in some kind of manual or a rule book. They'll say rule 3 says this, I'm asking you to do that. That's a strong piece. And then if that's not working, they may fall back to a different argument that is based on credibility. They might say, hey, listen, I've been here for 3 years. I'm not new. I've been in the system for a long time, right? I have credibility. You should help me based on that. And then if that's not working, they might fall back to the third piece, which is emotion, where you just start to manipulate or you start to express emotions in hopes that you can kind of get what you want. So this is happening all the time in our lives. We're doing it constantly, but most of us do this unconsciously. The reason I think it's an important thing to talk about in class is because rhetoric is a tool we use constantly. And if you know the three pieces, you can function in a much more strategic way in terms of trying to maneuver through your life, right? Now, to the bigger point of film and motion picture, a lot of people don't think of film, first of all, as an art. And a lot of people, when they do think of any art, they think that art is just supposed to make pretty things, pretty songs, pretty paintings, pretty pictures. But and I'm not going to say universally, a huge quantity of art has nothing to do with pretty. Most serious artists are trying to say something. They're trying to express themselves. They're tackling ideas, and they're doing it through the art form. That is a form of rhetoric. Art has rhetoric, right? So if you walk into a gallery and you see a photo of an impoverished person in Africa, right, that's presented by National Geographic, that's one rhetoric. If you saw the exact same photo in a different context, you might read it with a different rhetoric, right? So that's at the core of this class, is starting to look at film and to look at other art forms as vehicles for expression and rhetoric coming from the creators. Now, let's go from there to the film we're watching today, which is The Avengers. Most people, almost universally, if you said, you know, if you told a person that's going into the theater right now, hey, you're going to see The Avengers right now, what kind of message do you think it would have? Or what kind of message do you expect to get from it? Most people say there is no message. It's pure entertainment. It's popcorn. But think about it for a second, right? Is there rhetoric to these types of films? These big superhero films? Marvel? The answer is, of course. Of course there is. I mean, just look at the characters. Let's just do Captain America. Captain America is this guy with the shield and the red, white, and blue. Is there rhetoric to that character? Of course there is. What is it? What are his values? What's the character's values, right? Does he embody sort of the idealized version, the best of America? Our notions from the World War II era of sort of America at its peak, ethically, morally, spiritually, economically? Yes. There's a rhetoric to the character himself. Think about Superman. Now, Superman's not in this movie, but think about Superman. Superman as a phenomenon, as a character, emerges right around World War II. The man that created Superman is an immigrant from Lithuania in a Jewish family who witnessed his father, as a fairly young person, witness violence against his father. I think they were in New York. Don't quote me on that. So you can understand like that this Superman character didn't emerge from some corporate space. It emerged from one person's artistic sort of will, right? And if you think about a person who's new in a country, they're an immigrant, how they might crave for sort of belonging, for strength, right? For acceptance. It makes perfect sense that there's a rhetoric to all of this stuff. Now, with respect to the Avengers, these are crazy movies. They're very big movies. One of the most interesting things I think about this film is if you just look at these main characters, you've got Thor, who comes from Norse mythology. We're talking about Scandinavian mythology, right? You've got Captain America. He's a recent invention. You've got Iron Man, same thing. The guy with the bow and arrow, I don't even know who he is, but he looks like Robin Hood. He's obviously sort of a mock-up of a Robin Hood character. So we're talking Middle Ages of England. And you've got the Incredible Hulk back there. And then you've got Scarlett Johansson's character, and I can't remember her name, the character's name. So you have to ask yourself, how is it that we take these characters from drastically different cultural traditions and stick them into one movie and it's somehow cohesive, right? This isn't about rhetoric anymore, but this is just about the sort of phenomenon of the film. It's really interesting, right? So you can look at the film as a sort of conglomeration of other narratives packed into one new narrative. Some people would say, oh, that's a mud, right? It's sort of sloppy, but I disagree. If you look at most great narratives, they have that same sort of dynamic of absorbing other good narratives and pulling them in and then building off their strength. So these films are interesting in a lot of ways. Okay, so rhetoric is ethos, pathos, logos, which another way we can see that is just credibility, logic, and emotion. Very powerful tools in argument. And then the other portion of today's sort of lecture is this thing about current economics in Hollywood. Now, the Avengers and films like the Avengers have been completely dominant in the theaters for, I'd say, 6 to 7 years now. I mean, just take a pause for a moment and think about those big summer popcorn movies, how common they are. And is there anything else? There's a little bit. Is there a lot of the other stuff? Not a huge amount. So why the dominance? Why are they so dominant? What happened? What changed? Because this was not how American cinema was in the 70s. It's not how it was in the 80s. A little bit in the 90s. So we've entered a sort of a very specific chapter in Hollywood's history, and the question is why? Well, the reason is, and I'm going to grab my visual here. Alright, look at that. How slick is this? The main reason is that the DVD died. So if you guys think back, I know a lot of you guys might be 18 years old, but if you think back 7, 8 years ago, it was very common for people to have DVD collections. How much did a DVD cost? DVD cost $22, $20. Let me grab one. Okay, I'm back. Now here's the DVD that I made. Alright, so if in let's say 2005, if I sold this DVD at Walmart, I would sell it for $22. What most people don't know is that to manufacture this, ship it, print it, all of the cost to make this costs less than $2, right? Total. I'm talking with the shipping included, and that's for a small run, not a large run. So if I'm selling it for $22 or $20, it's a huge margin of profit. So I might make $18 off selling one. There are very few businesses with margins that big. That's a huge margin. Imagine if you could sell cars for that kind of, that margin. Now, DVDs sold very well for quite a while, and Hollywood got very used to that revenue stream. Matter of fact, DVDs represented roughly 50% of all of Hollywood's money. And there was sort of a system to it. If a film did $50 million at the box office in the theater, then they could make the presumption, the prediction, they would make the same amount on DVD, right? So what that means is if the DVD disappears, it means half of the money disappears. And that's what happens. The DVD is done. How many of you guys have bought a DVD this year? And if you did, you probably would buy it for $6 or $5 or $7, right? So that term tentpole, which you see in the PDF right there, this is what it refers to. If we imagine that this is a studio's output for one season, let's say it's 6 months, okay? The most expensive, the biggest film can be referred to as the tent pole. It's the highest pole that holds up the tent, right? That's the idea. Now what it means is, if the tent pole film brings in enough money, it gives a studio leverage to take risks on many other smaller films that are more risky. So for example, a superhero film at this point, they're predictably successful, right? So it's not that risky for studios. Now if you do like a crazy art movie, it might hit big, maybe nobody goes to see it at all. So the relationship between a tentpole film, which is the big expensive one that brings in all the money, in that little artistic film, they're linked together. The studio hedges its risks based on the income of the big film. Okay? The more income they can get from the tentpole film, the more they can invest in small risky films. Now, if you cut the money in half that the tentpole film was making, you get this. The whole tent gets flatter, and there's fewer films they can take risk on. There's just less money to sort of pad everything, and you get fewer of the small, artistically risky films, and what you see is the dominance of just that tentpole film, the big money maker, repeating. Now, in the design of a tentpole film, there's some other dynamics to these. It's not just the movie. So first of all, they're revolving platforms. The film doesn't just happen once. It's basically a series. It's almost a serial. So you can see, a Marvel film might come out in March. The next one comes out in July. Same characters, new situation. They are designed, important, this is really important, they're designed for global audiences. Now think about that for a second. You got to make a film that can show in Russia, that can show in Spain, it can show in Australia, Mexico, Brazil, Chile, right? What do you need to take out of the film to help people understand it? Because they're going to be reading captions, right? One of the first things you take out are culturally specific jokes, right? So these big tentpole films very often don't have like American humor in them because jokes don't translate, right? So these are the kinds of adjustments that get made to these films to make them marketable very broadly. So you reduce them to very simple narratives. You try and maximize the visual dynamic of the film so it's not based on language. Woody Allen films, you can't translate it. You have to know the culture to understand it. Okay, and then so you got global audiences, and then you've got the ancillary revenue streams. These are the other ways that the studio can make money off the film. That's, you know, selling toys and video games, t-shirts and other types of merchandise. So in the tentpole sort of design, all of that becomes important. Down here are a few examples of contemporary platforms, these tentpole films. You got the Marvel and the DC, Spider-Man, Star Wars, Transformers, blah, 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 blah. The other side to this economics, this big economics question, the other thing that changed is that where sales decline, sales of tickets decline, sales of DVDs especially decline, rentals increased. Rentals include Netflix, Amazon, streaming, Redbox. So you've got sales going down, rentals going up. Which one makes more money? Sales, because if you sell one ticket at the theater, it's 12 bucks. If you sell one rental at Redbox, how much do they make? I don't know, they make 75 cents. So this is another important pressure on Hollywood's income. As rentals increase and sales decrease, it's simply not as much money. Okay, great, that's it. So go ahead and watch the film when you have time. Afterwards, you have the post-assessment. That's a couple questions. Those have points. Don't skip that. It's also how I know you're there. It's how I know you're sort of attending the class. And then over there, or sorry, in week 1, you'll also see the forum. And you'll just look at my prompt, follow the instructions, hit reply, and put your answer in. Please don't duplicate other students' work. Enjoy the movie. I'll see you next week.